John Podesta frantically joined other Democrats in freaking out over new Joe Biden Burisma hacks. Are the Democrats panicking because something big is about to drop? It's a new article here from my website where I transcribed a recent interview with John Podesta. First, I point out that Democrats have been in panic mode since last Monday when the Ukrainian gas company that Democrat presidential candidate Joe Biden's son sat on the board of claimed that they were infiltrated by supposed Russian hackers months after the call to investigate the Bidens. Former Hillary Clinton campaign chair John Podesta freaked out at the news in a recent interview, also raging over the Democrats' failures in the impeachment debacle. Podesta gave the interview on January 16th on The Tent, a program produced by Podesta's own Center for American Progress. So before he started freaking out about these Biden hacks, the hosts first asked about what is going on with impeachment. On impeachment, one host asks Podesta to explain the gravity of the moment and what to expect in trial. Podesta responds saying, "I think you have to start with why he got impeached, which was that he was leaning on a foreign government to interfere in our own election. So the gravity of that with respect to the stakes in our democracy are extremely high. Having said that, I think that the Republicans, particularly in the House, refuse to look at any of that evidence. They really don't want to look at any of the witnesses. They tried to do everything they could to divert attention from the clear testimony of people who were not partisan, who were not Democrats, some of whom were appointed by Trump himself, who said that, who laid the factual case out for why this was at the heart of really what the founders put the impeachment clause into the Constitution for. They were very worried about, as a young democracy, whether foreign governments would interfere in the proper functioning of that democracy." So clearly this response from Podesta is steeped in hypocrisy. I add here, of course, Podesta's specious argument that Republicans don't want to look at witnesses is especially misleading given that Democrats are the ones desperately trying to do everything they can to block witnesses like Hunter or Joe Biden from testifying. Podesta then attempts to explain what he describes as the major difference between the Clinton impeachment and now. Podesta says, quote, "Trump's motivation was to get the Ukrainian government to at least announce, if not investigate Joe Biden, and try to use it in order to benefit his own re-election chances. And I think without really much of a factual predicate, I might add, but to get them to do that, to have the Ukrainians directly interfere with the election. You know, look, it worked for him in 2016. The Russians interfered with the U.S. election, and it helped put him into the Oval Office. So I think his tolerance for foreign governments playing around in the U.S. elections is high, at least by previous American standards." The host then continues asking, when Trump was impeached, Pelosi held those articles of impeachment, she said, to get a fair process. But what about additional evidence brought through the process? What's the pressure on the Senate to accept more evidence? In response, Podesta briefly promoted the idea of other witnesses, including John Bolton, before lamenting, quote, "I think whether that would influence any Republicans, I don't know. I think the party has become the party of Trump. I think they live in fear of his latest tweet. I think that's another particularly strong difference between then and now, which is that I think particularly in the Senate, the senators on both sides of the aisle felt a historic responsibility to take the trial seriously." Here comes the question that really set off Podesta. Then as the topic moved to Joe Biden and Burisma, Podesta interrupted the next question before bursting into a deranged tirade against President Trump and a new set of alleged Russian boogeymen. So here's the question that the host tried asking John Podesta before he interrupted. The host said, quote, "So speaking of the Bidens, some news broke this week that the Russians once again are trying to meddle in our affairs. New York Times reporting that they successfully hacked Burisma, which is the Ukrainian oil company at the center of all of this. What do you think about this? Do you think Russian interference? Have they learned any lessons from what they did in 2016? And are they trying to change their tactics? And do you feel..." Then Podesta interrupts the question, saying, "Yeah, they learned that it works." The host says that he's laughing nervously before Podesta continues. Podesta then says, quote, "They learned that it has a high return on investment, and at least while Donald Trump sits in the Oval Office, they don't pay much of a price for it. I think that this latest revelation that they've in fact hacked into Burisma, which is the company Hunter Biden sat on the board of, indicates that they're back, they're aggressive, they're up to their old tricks." Podesta then continued his meltdown, again blaming Russia for Hillary Clinton's 2016 election loss, saying, quote, "I think one of the frustrations we had in 2016 is, notwithstanding very strong evidence beginning in the summer of what they were up to, the press just treated it sort of as political ping pong and were much more interested in the gossip than the fact that the Russians were actually trying to attack our democracy. And we tried to press the case that they weren't covering that right. And for the most part, we were unsuccessful in that, and they liked the leaks better than they liked trying to understand what the Russians were trying to do." This quote from Podesta then continues, and this is a direct transcription, just to note, so I've left in all of the ums and ahs here. I think it really emphasizes how flustered Podesta is in this response. Podesta went on to say, quote, "Up through and even after the 17 intelligence units, not committees, agencies, were released, that letter that was signed by the Director of Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence that essentially said what the Russians were doing. The press didn't manage it, in my view, appropriately. Maybe they've learned their lesson. One would hope to see how they would react to what could be releases from both the releases from the fruits of Russian hacking, but also the vast network of disinformation, bots, etc. that the Russians did deploy and are continuing to deploy." Finally, Podesta says, "We are very slow to authorize the funding at the federal level to help states improve their election security, so we're sort of in a moment where we remain quite vulnerable, and it's going to take both a lot of effort, I think, to push back on this, and I think a lot of judgment about how some of this stuff at the end of the day gets covered, and I think we'll get no help from the White House in that regard." Again, in my own article here, I point out the flaws in Podesta's argument, adding, of course, John Podesta's description of the media's supposed mishandling of the Podesta leaks is extremely distorted. Podesta's claim is totally false when he says that the media did not act how he wanted them to, when in fact most of the mainstream media did exactly what Podesta wanted by ignoring the content of the leaks entirely, choosing instead to push the Democrats' Russia narrative. Most reading, likely, will remember when CNN anchor Chris Cuomo falsely warned his audience that it was illegal for anyone to read John Podesta's emails or any documents released by WikiLeaks. Still, Podesta claims that the mainstream media should have worked even harder to cover up for Hillary, as if they weren't already biased enough. Also, according to him, the country is obligated to let Democrats carefully control all political coverage in the media. Note how this mirrors the plan Podesta rolled out at Norway's Arendalsuka in 2017 to control online political messaging as well, where he told an audience of elite European globalists how they should work together to influence public policy in the United States. We've looked at this quote before on this channel, but I think it's relevant again as Podesta is talking about wanting even more control over the media. Back in 2017, he said, quote, "We adopted the social media strategy that President Obama effectively used, which Bernie Sanders effectively used, to talk to their core supporters online, said Podesta, blaming Clinton's failure on the fact that they, quote, left naked the ability on Facebook and other sites for negative messaging to bombard into those critical places. So is this Podesta preparing for a repeat of the last election? Could this new narrative being pushed by Podesta be a possible sign that the political establishment is worried about some disturbing secrets concerning Joe Biden and other Democrats soon going public? Could there be something on the horizon, potentially even bigger than the Podesta leaks, which already forced the Podesta brothers to shut down their own lobbying company, that could explain what is actually behind their new claims of yet another supposed Russian hacking story? Please tell me what you think is behind this reaction. Leave a comment. If you could give this video a thumbs up, that's greatly appreciated. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I've recently started getting back into updating realityreader.com. That's one place where you can follow for more updates as well. Also added a donate page where you can support the channel directly. Thanks so much everybody that has supported the channel through PayPal or Patreon so far. paypal.me/realityreader or patreon.com/realityreader. You can also find either of those links down in the video description to support the channel. Thanks again everyone. I'll follow up soon.